Hello, it's John Heaton, and nice day here in Budapest. Not terribly hot, but pleasant. I hear it's baking hot in England, so Hungary and the UK seem to have swapped weather in the last week because it's been warm but not too hot here. I'm going to review this album from Paul McCartney today, Chaos and Creation in the Backyard, 2005. Just newly acquired on vinyl. It was very hard to find on vinyl up to now. And before I discuss the album, just a few things to show you. This is the original CD deluxe edition, which has this clever design, Paul McCartney, and then Paul McCartney upside down as well. In many ways, I think that might have been a better front cover, particularly on the CD, because this picture is rather lost on a CD. Too small, as we've said. This also has a DVD of him, documentary on the making of the album and stuff. But on the vinyl, it's a much more effective picture taken by Paul's brother, Mike McCartney. It's called Our Kid Through Mum's Net Curtains, 1962. The back cover. And a good thing about vinyl albums was always to have the lyrics and musicians' credits here, readable size as you listen to the record. This is a sketch of Paul, quite a nice sketch of Paul. And then the label is on this nice Paul McCartney upside down design, which is a really nice label. So that's the vinyl, and there's also an insert of some drawings, which is a bit pointless. I don't think these are particularly good drawings, but anyway, I think that picture of Paul was quite good, but those pictures of the hands and stuff, I don't really see the point, but anyway. So that's the vinyl, if I can get this back in. And then, quite interestingly, recently I found these two singles in Aberdeen, in Scotland, which I was very pleased to find. Quite rare, I think. The Fine Line single, again with the drawing here, which doesn't really add much to the cover. And then you've got the record. And then, believe it or not, a poster of this hand drawing, which is even more pointless, but anyway, nice to have. Slight quibbles over the packaging maybe, but there's a bonus track on the B-side which is not on the album, which is not bad. And then this one, a nicer design, the Jenny Wren single, with a track on the B-side, not on the album. Really nice dark red colouring and dark red vinyl. So very happy to have those. Actually, they belong to my son because I gave them to him as a present. So I'm borrowing and the vinyl as well. I haven't yet managed to pick up the vinyl for myself, so I'm showing you his copy. This McCartney Ultimate Music Guide gives Chaos a pretty decent review, and then from a contemporary review at the time, McCartney has come out of his safety zone and challenged himself in a way not seen since his first solo album, but the feeling remains that the one person who could really inspire him to write one final classic record was tragically murdered in 1980. I'll come to that in a minute, the reviews and stuff. It gives Fine Line, How Kind of You, Jenny Wren, At the Mercy, Friends to Go, all 4 stars. And then Any Day, and This Never Happened Before, also get 4 stars, along with Riding to Vanity Fair, 4 stars, and the remainder get 3. So yeah, pretty good review. I'm not saying I agree with everything. I think this album is very highly rated, not just here in the vinyl community, but generally. It's an album I've slightly struggled with over the years to get into, but I've given it a chance in the last few days again, just playing it, and I can certainly see its strengths. It's always been compared to McCartney and McCartney 2 because it's more or less a solo effort in terms of Paul playing the musicianship, all the instruments. And I read one annoying article on the internet just this morning which said McCartney was unfinished, McCartney 2 was sunk by its synthesizer experimentation, and this is basically saying this is altogether much better. Which I have a problem with because I think McCartney and McCartney 2 are both important records in Paul's catalogue, and in terms of songwriting, the songs on McCartney are, better than anything in the rest of his career, more or less, or of that standard. 3 or 4 absolute chestnuts. Whereas this album, there are some good songs, but I wouldn't say the classic status quite in many. Well, maybe in a few cases. Another criticism of this album has been that there were no rockers, or very few rockers. But I think when an artist reaches an age like Paul has reached or had reached when this came out, maybe you don't want him to do too many rockers because his voice is going to struggle to sing them. And if I think of some of the rockers from Paul's recent albums, such as Nod Your Head, Rinse the Raindrops, and even the new single Come On To Me, it's just a bit strange. Well, not only are they not very good tracks, maybe Come On To Me is quite catchy, but it's a bit strange. I don't really want to talk about the new single here, but a bit strange for a 76-year-old to be singing subject matter such as that, I think. And so the thing I like about this album is actually not that it's devoid of rockers, but just more that it's more personal. I think the lyrics speak to the situation he was in. Obviously, with hindsight, with the divorce from Heather, one can read all kinds of things into this song or that song. And whether, Paul, as usual, claims that the songs were not about anyone in particular, but I think if you read the lyrics and you listen to them in the situation he was in, it's pretty clear that a lot of this album is autobiographical. I think Me and Mr. Mayo described this album as Paul's Plastic Ono band. I don't think as an achievement I think it is as good, but I think I know what he's saying in terms of the honesty in the lyrics, and he's bearing his soul, which frankly Paul doesn't often do in his life, or hasn't often done. He does it occasionally, but he doesn't always own up to the fact that he's done it. And I think on this album he really is singing from the heart, and it's very moving. So that was that. So let's go through the album. Well, as with several other albums I've reviewed on this channel, if the opening track isn't my favourite, then I don't tend to grab it off the shelf that often. And I know these days one can skip the opening track or just do random play or something, but Fine Line is a track where a lot of people seem to love it, including the Ultimate Music Guide. Said it's one of the 3 best tracks on the album, but I just find it a bit repetitive and not that inspired. Just my opinion, guys, sorry if you disagree, but the album really, I won't say recovers, but I think it comes into its own with the more personal tracks. Like High Kind of You is a really moody ballad with minor key and nice chord changes, and just really moving. And I don't want to speculate who it's about, but I think it could be about Heather and when their relationship was going well, because this is one of the few uplifting songs on the album, although as I said, it's in a minor key, so the bloody fly would get off the... Sorry. Jenny Wren is next, and is a classic acoustic ballad, I think it's fair to say. Jenny Wren, the name taken from a Dickens novel I read, similar to Blackbird in the acoustic chords sequences, and very nicely played. And there's a guest guy playing an instrument called the Duduk, D-U-D-U-K, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Pedro Ustash does a great job and adds a lot of atmosphere to this song, and apparently they recorded it, just the two of them, and then Pedro said to Paul, well, I'm really looking forward to hearing the finished track with the bass and the keyboards, and Paul said, that's it, it's finished. And I think Paul was right. And did I mention Nigel Godrich is producing this album? To great effect for the most part. He's famous for his work with Radiohead, and he's recently done Roger Waters' comeback album. I think his work with Paul here is excellent. And he wasn't afraid to tell Paul if he thought a song was subpar, which pissed Paul off, but actually made it into a better album, I think. So that's a great track, Jenny Wren. At the Mercy is, again, a very personal track, but I think this reflects the more troubled times he was having with Heather, because you can see, well, certainly with hindsight, you can see cracks in his domestic situation. I mean, he starts off at the mercy of a busy road. Who can handle such a heavy load? And then we can think of nothing more to say. If you show me love, I won't refuse. I'd know you'd never make me choose between the love I've got and the love I'd lose. Sometimes I'd rather run and hide than stay and face the fear inside. I guess you'd rather see me grow into a better man than the one you know. Sometimes my head is hanging low, but it's time to get on with the show. Well, maybe not. Maybe that's more reflecting the recovery from his loss of Linda, and how that probably made their early relationship troublesome or difficult, because Paul struggled to fall in love with someone else initially, maybe. Yeah, I don't know if that song is about the splitting up, reading it again, but it could be. Later on we'll see albums more directly directed at Heather, I think. Friends to Go is next, and this is a really nice, jaunty song, which is, again, one of the few uplifting songs on the album, apparently inspired by the spirit of George Harrison, according to Paul. And he plays all the instruments on this track, and it's very effective. Then we get English Tea, which is kind of Paul doing his vaudeville, playful type song, and it's a good melody. I just find the lyrics a bit annoying on all this sitting in the garden and playing croquet. I just don't think it's really Paul's world, and he's being a novelist and writing about it, and it's fine, but it's just, I think he was more effective in this style with something like You Gave Me the Answer, where he says you'll never be a member of the aristocracy. To their delight, you'd merely invite them in for a cup of tea. I think that's more self-deprecating and more effective as a lyric. So I don't like English Tea. I know people like it, and he did it on the tour and stuff. Just not a good one for me. Too Much Rain is, I say obviously, but I think it's written about the fact that Heather had gone through a lot of trauma in her life, including losing a leg in an accident, and Paul is basically, and this song is incredibly well produced by Nigel Godrich. So laugh when your eyes are burning, smile when your heart is filled with pain, sigh as you brush away your sorrow, make a vow that it's not going to happen again. It's not right in one life, too much rain. I think that's really heartfelt and really nice song to Heather when their relationship was going well. I like that. One of my favourites on the album, and great acoustic guitars. I think he's playing all of them. Let me just check. Yeah, every single instrument on that track is Paul. So then we turn over to side 2 and we get A Certain Softness. I don't really have a great deal to say about this track. It's a nice track. They tend to blend into one another to some extent, which is good in some ways because it flows. Nicely sung, nothing special. I'm not sure if it should have opened side 2, but I guess most people acquired this on CD, so it doesn't matter. Riding to Vanity Fair. Now this is a really interesting song because again, one can speculate who it's about. By the way, I want to mention this book. I think I've mentioned it before, but this is a good book by Luca Perazzi, who goes through all of Paul's studio sessions, solo, where it was recorded, who played on what, and gives his commentary about every song, and it's quite illuminating. And on this track he speculates that it might be about Jeff Baker, Paul's manager, who Paul fired in 2003, but then he says more plausibly it's probably about Heather. And I think reading the words, well, you tell me what you think, but I think it's probably about Heather, although they didn't get divorced till 2006, so if it was about Heather, then there were problems brewing a couple of years before when this track was recorded. There was a time when every day was young, the sun would always shine, we sang along, when all the songs were sung, believing every line. That's the trouble with friendship, for someone to feel it, it has to be real, or it wouldn't be right, and I keep hoping for friendship, and I wouldn't dare to presume it was there, while you were riding to Vanity Fair. As I say, with hindsight, seems to be clearly about Heather, and it's a very moving song, one of the best on the album. Follow Me is an early recorded back in 2003, I think, with the band, and then Nigel Godrich came in and said, Paul, I want to take you out of your comfort zone, so I want you to do a solo record, or more or less solo. So he had to tell the band that they weren't needed. But this track is a decent one, and you can see why it made the album, because it again, it fits the flow. Then we get Promise to You Girl, which I guess is the closest to a rocker on the album, apart from the opening track maybe. To me, this song is very reminiscent of that Wings B-side, Little Woman Love. Particularly the piano lick at the beginning, and the way it goes into, guitar solo and stuff. And to me, I miss Denny and Linda's harmony vocals. So, if you ask me which one I prefer the Wings track to this one. But it's not terrible or anything. And then next we have probably two of the best tracks on the album to close it with. This Never Happened Before is just a glorious ballad with superb strings arranged by, I'm not sure who arranged the strings, but obviously Nigel Godrich is behind the production, so he probably suggested them. And they're not in your face, they don't swamp the song, but they're very nice complementary strings to the melody, and it is a great melody. And there's a story in that book I showed you of Paul was having a massage with someone, and he played the masseur with this track, and the masseur said she was about to get married, and Paul said, well, if you like this track so much, and she liked the track, and if you like this track so much, why don't you play it at your wedding? And she said, well, it's highly bootleggable. And Paul said, no, I'll send you the tape, you play it, send it back to me. And so that's what she did, and it's a very happy story, and not many people who get to play an unreleased McCartney track at their wedding, so that was a nice story, and it's a great song. I think I played Beautiful Night at my wedding, but it wasn't unreleased. Anyway, pun not intended, closes the album. And again, nice production and nice little piano riff in there. So Paul's playing quite a bit of piano on this album, along with his normal guitar work. And again, another very moving song. And I think this album is certainly worth investigating, and it's got a lot of highlights on it. It's not perhaps in my top 10 McCartney albums ever. I know a lot of you do rate it that highly, or even in your top 5. But I'm glad I've rediscovered it and seen it for what it is, and appreciate its merits more than I had done previously, perhaps. And it's much nicer to have this cover on the full LP size. So thank you for watching, and see you next time.